I'm Isabella and you're listening to Zeno. Each month I have conversations with people from all walks of life about their personal stories of home, identity and the search for belonging. Today I'm with Jahnvi Singh, who is the host for our learning marathon where we are discussing ideas of home and belonging. So it's only right that we start this series with her.
I'm Jahnvi and I'm a learning designer, facilitator and coach, but I'm also someone who is a migrant. I was born and brought up in India, but over the last 5 years, I've tried to find my home and sense of belonging across the US and now in the UK where I live. And I'm bilingual and I'm trying to make sense of this new place that I'm in with the people that I am currently learning with on our learning marathon together.
I think the first question that I want to start with is, how do you answer the question, where are you from? And when you answer that question, what truths do you think are missing from your answer?
That's an interesting one. So I grew up in New Delhi, and Delhi is the capital of India, which is extremely multicultural. People from across India, from across time, have settled there and lived there together. It's a given that, if you live in Delhi, your family may or may not be from there. Traditionally, historically, you've moved from somewhere. Your roots lie elsewhere, but you have also kind of laid roots here. And even in Delhi, when I was growing up in school, people would say, "Where are you from?" I'd say, "From Delhi." "No, but where are you really from?" And I'd say, "Oh, my mom is from South India and my dad is from North India, but I live in Delhi." And that was okay. So I think the nuance of where are my parents from? Where are my grandparents from? And, that story just keeps going further and further back in time and across the world. But I think that comes up depending on who the person asking that question is.
So it's quite common then for someone in New Delhi to ask you, where are you really from? And that naturally you start talking about your family's history. Like, that's quite a natural thing for you.
Yeah, I remember a lot of that happening. Of course, as kids, you don't understand the importance of that, of your story, of where you're from. And because in Delhi, everyone looked similar. There was just an understanding that historically you might be from somewhere and it came from a place of curiosity. But here it's more like, oh, you might look like you're from somewhere else. So where are you from?
So it has a different tone when it's asked here versus in New Delhi?
I think so. But also, it completely depends because a lot of people have moved here from different places, right? So it does come from a place of curiosity. I somehow don't know how to ask that question, like, where are you from? Because I fear that, oh, what if people take it the wrong way? Or,
Right.
I don't want to seem like I care. But sometimes it's just interesting to ask,
You genuinely want to make a connection with someone and it's not coming from a bad place. It's coming from curiosity, as you said. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And it sounds like you like the curiosity because it allows you to make connections with someone. And as you see that person go deeper and deeper, you can unravel more of who you actually are in that conversation, depending on who that person is.
Yeah. I mean, it unravels the points of connection we might have. I like that you said that because you might find that you have things in common, but you might find that you're from two completely different parts of the world and ways of thinking, and that sparks even more conversation if you're willing to go down that road, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing about forming connections. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and be open to questions like, where are you from? Oh, that's cool.
It completely depends on the person, what kind of circumstances you're being asked that question in. But you're having to partly analyze why that person's asking that question, right? But as you say, if it feels like genuinely coming from a place of curiosity, then there's no harm in that. And if anything, that's welcome because then you can build a relationship off of that and build an open conversation about more important things right?
Yeah, and I feel like I like owning the fact that I'm from India and I'm a migrant and I'm bilingual. And I like saying that because I think a lot of us are out there trying to find our stories and find the words for where we're from. And I think the more I'm able to say it openly and happily, the more others feel welcome to explore that with me. So that's, I think, exciting. And I like that question, where are you from? Because it opens up a lot of conversation points.
How do you think your answer to where you're from has changed over time?
I mean, of course, it's changed. I think I've always grappled with that question and understanding that, well, I'm not from here. I was born in Delhi. I was raised in Delhi. I went to school there. I have my friends there. All of my childhood memories are there. But I think from a very young age, I always loved the fact that my parents weren't from here. So there was a very different culture that I could draw from, two very different cultures that I could draw from. So I think I had started exploring that question when I was very young. But I think the difference is that by birth, I am the citizen of India. So when I'm in India and people ask me that question, it becomes a question about which state are you from? And that's confusing because now what do I say? I'm from Delhi, but like my mom's from somewhere, my dad's from somewhere. But here, I don't need to give that much detail about where I'm from. I think that's how the answer has changed. That here it starts with a blanket statement of the country you're from. Because even here, like if you ask someone who was born and brought up here, they would say, oh, I'm from the north, I'm from the northeast, I'm from Bristol, I'm from Bath, I'm from Birmingham. So it's almost the same as someone who's moved here. For me, it's when someone asks me, where are you from? It's a much bigger place, the idea of India. And that comes with its own set of assumptions that people make. Oh, you're from India, so, you must speak a certain language or dress a certain way or eat a certain type of food. And that's where you start going in. So I think the starting points to the questions are different, of course, where I'm asked, but they're still fun to explore.
Right. So it's more of a geographic answer. I'm from the country.
Yeah.
And then you take the stereotypes or associations with that and then maybe delve into something a bit more substantial. How do you define yourself and why? Moving beyond the just simple question of where are you from, like how do you self-identify in terms of where you are in your life right now?
That's a really nice question too. So I'm Jahnvi. I am a woman. I use she, her pronouns. I am from India and I've been moving around and finding home across the world. I love food. I love engaging with different cultures. I'm bilingual. I speak Hindi and English. I grew up speaking both those languages. And my mom's from southern India, but a migrant herself, moving around across India. My father's from Lucknow, but, also moved to Delhi. My grandparents moved all their lives. So I hold on to that idea of being a migrant and mover and forming my identity and history as we have moved from one place to the other. So I think place is still a very important part of how I define myself and my identity. But the way it plays out is that I love engaging with people. I love listening to people's stories. I love making sense of the world together with others. So the work I do is a big part of my identity too. I grew into the role of a learning designer and facilitator. And that's also how I talk about myself, the work I do and the people I'm with.
What does it mean to you to be a migrant? What does that mean to you?
I think being a migrant means that you're able to write your story any way you want to. Not a lot of us write stories with happy endings, or the genre of the story might change, but we have control over it. as much as our circumstances do. So, how we document our stories becomes really important. And yeah, being a migrant means leaving things behind. The suitcase metaphor really fits in, literal and metaphorical, because when you move from one place to the other or one space to the other, you do kind of leave stuff behind and you have to unpack and figure new things out in a new place. So I think being a migrant also means just knowing how to say hello and goodbye at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah. And say hello and goodbye to parts of yourself as well as other people or other things outside of yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What I've learned from you through our learning journey as well together is just how important it is to reframe this search for belonging. You make it very empowering. It can be a very dark experience and very isolating experience, but the way you frame it is so important because actually we have so much to offer and there's so much strength and power in it. It's just about making sense of it, finding the right story to then bring yourself towards the future that you want for yourself. What are you leaving behind when you move?
Like you said, relationships with others. And I think moving and migrating from one place to the other is the same as living life, right? Because every moment in time you're leaving the present you behind because you're growing into something else. You read an article that changed your perspective about something and now you're a different person because you read that article or you had that great life-changing coffee. And I think it's a very simplistic way of saying it, but I think moving is very similar because you're leaving a part of yourself behind, how your senses made sense of the environment you were in. And now you're in a completely different place, surrounded by different kinds of people, different kinds of information, different weather, different buildings, different histories, different cultures, different languages, different food. Your body and your mind has to get used to so much. So you're just adapting yourself constantly. So when I left India, I left the proximity to my family behind. I'm still in touch with them, but Zoom is not the same. I left conversations that slid in and out of Hindi and English with the world outside. I still speak in Hindi sometimes with my husband, but it's different from when you lived in a place where that was just accepted, that you sang Bollywood songs all the time on the streets. Right. And I left behind, I think, this sensory assault that hits you when you're in Delhi. But then I moved to Boston from Delhi. And that was, it required a lot of getting used to a different place, a different set of people, a different culture. When I left Boston, by that time I had formed a community, reconnected with old friends, made new friends, gotten used to this city, its history. And so that's what I left behind when I moved here. Those new friends and that small feeling of being at home, even though I didn't say this is where I belong.
And how long were you in Boston for?
2 years.
So all the hard work and effort of building that, then quickly you had to do the same thing over again. And it seems like it must have been a very draining feeling as well, because you made these roots, but then having to do that all over again after it had just been built.
Yeah, that was hard. And I think you learn so much about yourself when you go through any life-changing experience. You learn how you deal with conflict, how you deal with newness and ambiguity, and how quickly you are able to change yourself, and how rooted you are in yourself. Finding roots in a place is one thing, but how sure of yourself and your identity and your being are you? And that takes a lot of work. And when you move around quite a bit, it becomes even more important to hold on to who you are and why you do the things you do and say the things you say.
Right.
And be open to rediscovering more and more with every step of the way.
I really like your reflection on that. You see movement as being life itself. And I really connect with that because I think that so often there's this stereotype that people who have lived in multiple places, always moving forward, always switching from one place to the other because nowhere will accept you because there's no one place that you can say, this is me. But what I like about your framing is this is how we all are. We're all moving in some way and finding a different group or a new interest or a new town. Or it's just more pronounced for us and requires so much self-reflection.
We often want to say that a place is very unwelcoming. The people in this new place are unwelcoming. And to some extent, that might be true. It also does depend on why you moved. Migration happens for so many different reasons. And I have to say I'm very fortunate. I understand that it was my choice to move. A lot of people don't have that choice. And I think, therefore, how the movement hits you really depends on why you've moved. But for myself, I think it's easy to fall into that trap of what you read or hear about a place. Whereas that's not always true. You just have to put yourself out there. It's really just the same as stepping out of the house or kind of smiling at someone new because you just want to make a friend. I mean, we did that when we were young.
Yeah.
Why was it so easy to make friends when we were young children? We were still learning about ourselves as we are now. We were still surrounded by others from different places, families, personalities as we are now. But why do we put so much pressure on ourselves that, we can't do this as adults?
It seems like you're very connected to like your inner child. As in, I've loved learning that from you. Like in our group, you are so adamant that play is a central part of the learning process. And that for me was like a learning curve for me because like I never ever got to play in my learning and my studying. Like that's just, it's so hard. So I'd love to hear like what about your childhood experiences growing up informed your approach to your work or your sense of belonging now.
I think the people who I surround myself with have a big role to play in how I look at life. When I was growing up, I wouldn't say I had loads of friends. I like keeping to myself and not having big groups around me. But the few friends that I did have were just really fun people. And I feel that sometimes when I am low, right before the learning marathon and kind of joining Enrol Yourself as a host fellow for myself, in those intense moments of unbelonging and feeling lost, I didn't play. And I was just someone who was very quiet, went really deep inside myself. I love playing board games, but I also love just laughing a lot and making other people laugh and just enjoying ourselves, being silly, taking that risk that we can be wrong and it's going to be totally fine. And when I felt like I didn't belong, that feeling intensified, that I didn't want to enjoy things. So I think that was a clear sign for me that play is important. Play needs you to be vulnerable, right? Because whether it's physical play, you're going to fall down, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to bump
Play is
corners.
vulnerable. I love that.
And that's it. You just have to be open to falling and getting hurt. And that, again, needs a lot of opening up and the ability to be silly and sometimes say the wrong thing, but also be open to being corrected and moving around, dancing through life, humming a tune.
Would you say that that sense of playfulness and its importance is something that you've brought with you as you carry your identity through the places that you live in?
It was something that I got from the people around me. not necessarily from India, but we could be anywhere. And I'm just really inspired by people who can have fun. And I think it frees you up also, right? Like, I like feeling like that. I like feeling like we can be free with our bodies. And I like that. I like how we can be ourselves just because we opened ourselves up. My mentor at Enrol Yourself, he says that when we think of play, we always think of not being serious. But play is also serious work because it needs you to be a certain way. It leads to learning, and embodied learning is a big part of how we make sense of the world. So the more you're able to open your mind up to feeling through new things and ideas and conversations, the more you're able to make sense of it better and almost embed it in yourself in a better way.
My mind's blown about that. Can you explain that to me again? Like, embodied learning is how we learn more about the world. How does that play out?
I mean, the basic thing is when you hear about, say, when people say motor skills, right? And you learn to catch a ball. And then it's requiring a lot of effort. There's a lot of hand-eye movement, coordination. You need to catch in a way that you don't hurt yourself. And when you're actually playing catch, you don't think about those things. Your body is instinctively doing that.
Right.
And you're just like, oh, I caught it. No, you didn't. I'm going to throw it in a way that, you're going to miss. But, oh, my God, I caught it. And you're kind of layering that sense of play and achievement and challenge on top of it. So you're actually thinking about that aspect of it than what your body is learning at the same time. They say that when you do something, so that's why experiential learning is so important, because when you experience something, when you don't just read about something, say in a textbook, but you go to a museum and learn about it, have a conversation about it, when you experience something, your brain starts making different kinds of connections. When you just read about something in a textbook, your brain is only kind of catching a snapshot of that textbook page probably. But when you learn about something by doing it, by being in a play about it, by thinking like a character or playing a word association game, your brain is making different kinds of connections. It's like when we try and remember things, our brain basically walks down a synapse that it made or a connection it made. And the more it walks down that path, the more solid a memory becomes. And when you play and learn something by doing it and experiencing it in different ways, you've made more paths to that piece of information.
Wow, that's fascinating. What struck me about what you said as well is even the ball example. When you're first catching the ball, sometimes it might hurt, it might be difficult, but the act of play makes it easier to kind of fumble through the pain, and like you're learning, and it's okay that you get hurt sometimes because you're still having fun, which is so interesting. I see connections here as well with what you've explored in terms of like ritual making, the pathways. When you act out a certain ritual, you're re-remembering an experience or a tradition or meaning. You talked about moving from Boston to the UK already. So can you tell us about what inspired you to start our shared belonging, our learning group?
I did my master's in Glasgow. And Glasgow was the first time I moved away from home. And I loved Glasgow because I was studying at the art school. And I met so many amazing people. And Zara, who started Enrol Yourself in 2016, I met her in Glasgow. And we've just been following each other online. And wherever I moved, I kept in touch with this entity called Enrol Yourself that she and other peers had started. And they were exploring learning in some really new and interesting ways. at some point in my life, I found myself going down that route of designing learning experiences, of facilitating workshops. So following Enrol Yourself's work was really interesting. When I moved to the UK in 2019, I reached out to them to say, I'm here, I want to understand what we can do together. But at the same time, I was grappling with my own uncertainties of where I am, what's home, where do I belong? And you know about the culture shock waves, right? So obviously, initially, I was going through my honeymoon phase. And I'm like, oh, look at this new place. What fun. Oh, look at this weather. It's lovely. But then winter set in. People were very different. I didn't know how to express myself in this new space. And I found myself wanting to fit in boxes that others were creating, whether it meant how one should be in this society or what kind of jobs I should be applying for and what kind of roles I should be looking at. And it was all very confusing. So when the pandemic happened and I realized that I couldn't go back home was when I think it started hitting me even more that, okay, I'm here and I feel like I don't want to be here. And that's when I learned that Enrol Yourself had been inviting people to join their host fellowship. And so what they're doing is they have been running this 6-month learning program called the Learning Marathon, where community of peers comes together and supports each other to make sense of a learning question that everyone individually comes with. And by exchanging skills and motivation and by connecting people to their networks, you sort of turn your question and exploration into a project or some semblance of an answer to the question. And I was just always intrigued by the methodology. So when they said they're going to train a bunch of hosts to host their own learning marathons, I said, this is probably what I want to do. So then I joined the host fellowship. And when it came to thinking about what I wanted the learning marathon to be about, the question that we were told to ask ourselves was, what is that big thing that you want to not solve, but explore? And for me, because the questions of home, belonging, who we are in new spaces, and how do we grow into being better versions of ourselves in these new spaces together was so alive. That's how I decided that our shared belonging would be the right container. That's when, so September 2020, bang in the middle of the pandemic, was when I wanted to gather a community around these questions of home and belonging. And that's how we met.
Yeah, that's how we met. And it sounds like that decision to start and to host in that very difficult time for you was such, things became expansive. You were expressing more of who you actually are despite the location, despite the circumstances, despite the fact you couldn't see your family. You were creating a new space and meeting new people and building that community around who you actually are, which is answering these big questions and making people feel safe enough to learn and grow together. You mentioned before Priya Basil's work, Be My Guest, which I've only read a few pages of it, but it was just already just so hard-hitting in her style of writing and talking about food and family, belonging. And I wanted to ask you, in light of your work as a learning designer and a facilitator, what do the roles of guest and host mean to you? Why are they significant?
Yeah, I remember that bit in her book where she references the word goshti, like an Indo-European word, which means everything guest and host together. I think what I really liked about that history of the word is that being a host means to welcome, but being as much a part of the gathering. As a host, I'm not just running the learning marathon. I'm merely creating a space where I'm as much of a guest in our explorations as everyone else is. And I think that reciprocity is what is very important within myself and with the others that I share the space with. Being a host sometimes can put that pressure on you that you need to control things. And being a guest sometimes makes one feel like I can leave whenever I want, or that I don't have responsibilities here. I don't have to do the washing up.
First guest to leave doesn't have to do the washing up.
And sometimes as a guest, you just choose to be the last one to leave so you can help in the cleanup. And I love that relationship that we can be either. Of course, these expectations that we have that someone who starts the idea or holds the space is the one responsible for it leads to a very unidimensional way of functioning and working. Whereas a host and a guest that comes together and almost interchanges roles makes the space more alive and makes us grow even further than we could have gone with just our single ways of thinking and being and going about things.
Yeah, absolutely. In that more multidimensional approach, you're more sensitive to how the guests are feeling, and you're more in line with what needs to change or how you can adapt the space so that everyone feels comfortable and like they can contribute and learn.
And if we take turns in being the host to the space, then we start understanding what the space means to us even more and how we want to grow it. I've been thinking about objects and what they mean to us, how we tell stories through the things that we surround ourselves with, or rituals that I've been learning from other people. And you've been understanding more and more about listening and restorative justice. And what does that have to do with belonging? And I think the fact that we have this space where we can offer it to each other, but make it relevant to what our collective needs are, just makes it more exciting.
I feel like generosity has a massive role to play here. And I'm seeing that a lot in like the references that you've made in your writing and quotes that you've pulled out from poets and authors, and also thinking about it in terms of Priya Parker's work, The Art of Gathering. How do you think of generosity and empathy in that learning space and in what you're doing?
Two very big words. Generosity. I mean, you just have to be open with everything. I love the way Priya Parker talks about generosity, but in lots of different ways. It's like excluding, but generously, holding, but generously, because it's all about welcoming everything in. I think if we are creating a space together, then all of us needs to be welcomed in at every point in time. And I think what's really unique about our learning marathon is the fact that it's completely online. And that word, generosity, means something very different. And power, how much power we hold as facilitators, how much interaction, how much conflict we give space to changes, because this is a very new space, new kind of media that we're dealing with. So it's been a learning curve. But like you said, empathy, I can't always know how someone else is feeling or what they're going through. But all we can do is create a space for all of ourselves to come in. And whether it was, say, understanding that you might not leave anything at the door, something that I've heard in a lot of workshops that we do is, what do you want to leave at the door? That is generous exclusion, in the sense that we've curated this group together, and now that we've made that effort to bring this very particular group of people together, all of us needs to come in. But I think that also kind of sparks new thoughts and connections and ideas. So let's go.
I loved your piece for the Relationships Project, where you wrote about your 21 conversations on belonging. You talked about belonging as finding the ingredients to your favorite comfort food. What are your favorite comfort foods, and why is it important that we have comfort food?
The thing about comfort food is that it helps us fall back on a memory that we are carrying within us. It may be a smell or a taste or a sound that we may have forgotten, may have not thought about in a long time. But food has a way of reminding us of that moment. Even if we can't see it clearly, we feel it. So, for example, one of my comfort foods is this aubergine recipe that my mom makes. It's just a very simple recipe that she's always made, but it was one of my favorite things as a child. And what it reminds me of is that I would come home from school, and whenever my mom had made that particular aubergine sabzi, the day was better. And, anything could have happened at school. But the fact that khatta meetha bengan was made the day better. And I carry that memory with me. So when I make that now, sitting far from mom, it just reminds me of that time when I used to tell myself things will be fine. Food brings everyone together because it's a conversation starter. Everyone has now learned to experiment with flavors and ingredients and cuisines, and we're just completely satiating ourselves. I read the other day that a recipe for belonging, essentially, if you see hunger as isolation being the hunger in that story, then belonging is the idea of satiating yourself. So the fact that you have eaten that dish that you have so lovingly prepared, that holds the stories of where you're from or how you're feeling or where you are or where you want to be or where you were at some point in time, you're basically telling yourself that you belong here in front of this plate of food.
It seems like there's often a connection between a comfort food meal and a caregiver. I find that those two are always very connected, right? And maybe having the meal is a way to relive those feelings of being cared for and being loved in that way.
And it takes so much effort to prepare a dish when you really think about it, right? You have to think about the ingredients, you have to think about flavor combinations. And if you're making it for someone you love, you just end up putting that bit of an extra effort into it. You're putting a piece of yourself into this dish you're making.
There's this quote in your article for the Relationships Project. It was a David Whyte quote, actually, from his poetry. You wrote that the moment you've uttered the exact dimensionality of your exile, you're already on your way home. And I found that really resonant. It's a subversion, right? Because exile is so negative, it's so isolating. But the minute you know something about it and why you felt that way, you're then able to reconstruct that feeling of home. And I think that connects quite strongly to your learning question that you're exploring, which is about curating your belonging to be cyclical and adaptive. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your learning question, where you are with it now, where you're hoping to go with it, and what you've learned so far.
That David Whyte quote that you just read out was one of the first writings on belonging and finding home that I engaged with when I first started thinking about this learning marathon. I was just starting to pull myself out of a very, very deep isolation, and I just didn't feel like things would make sense. But when I started talking to more people about it, one of the things that I did to make more sense of this word belonging was talk to people. And I realized that the more I spoke with people and asked them, when have you felt that feeling of not belonging, and what questions of belonging are you holding right now, I always found something to connect with in their stories. And that's what made me realize that we can feel as alone as our minds tell us. But the more we talk about where we are and how we're feeling, the easier it becomes for us to make sense of it, because in a conversation, you will always find some nugget of wisdom that somebody else has tried, a ritual or a tool that someone else has tried that you might want to use for yourself. And I found myself doing a lot of that. I spoke to someone who said, when I move to a new place, I chart a path to the closest coffee shop that I'm going to be a regular at. And I realized that even though I had moved to this new place, I hadn't done that. Why had I not charted a regular path? Because at some point I felt like I had nowhere to go. And I think walking can be so restorative. It can be so eye-opening. It's an exploration into where you are and what this new place is. And I just hadn't done that. And so I started walking. I started discovering a little more. And then I spoke to 21 other people and discovered more about their stories that connected with mine. That was one realization, that I have a basic understanding of who I am and what I want to do and who I want to be. But I can also learn so much from others. So as David Whyte said, my journey home was actually a realization that I wanted to figure this out with other people. And I know that we can make more sense of it when we're together. So my learning question started as a very personal one, because I felt lost. And I said, I'm going to figure out what tools do I need to support myself with and curate in my life so that my sense of belonging can be cyclical, because belonging is not the destination. It's a point in time where you enter and you're happy and you're comfortable and you're secure, but you will move out of that. And there will be other moments of unbelonging, and that belonging and unbelonging will always be in flux. By learning from our peer group, I started picking apart what people found in common. What I discovered was that when people talk about that sense of belonging, it centers around 4 key feelings. The feeling of being safe, the feeling of being comfortable, of being accepted and acknowledged, and that feeling of being loved and cared for. And when those 4 things are in place, you feel that sense of belonging. But that sense of belonging is rooted in the relationships that we build. And that relationship, again, is with 4 different things. A relationship with ourselves, like how sure of yourself are you? Do you know your own story? And how much of it are you writing? That relationship with others, with a partner, with a group of people, with the community that you want to be a part of or explore things with. Your relationship to place, that belonging to a place and its history, that sort of embodied living is a big part of your sense of belonging. And the relationship with your purpose, why you're doing what you're doing. And when you have that, that's like a framework of belonging that I developed as part of the Learning Marathon. Now I am trying to use that framework as a lens to see what I am doing to build that sense of belonging and to build those tools and rituals that orient me towards my sense of belonging.
I think your framework is so empowering. I mean, I've said that to you before, and I really think you should publish it one day, because the amount of clarity that I got from reading it was like, this is exactly it. This is how you make it happen. This quote in your article on the 21 Conversations kind of touches on this. Belonging is not the destination itself, but the interconnected moments where we come alive and come to rest together. I absolutely love that quote. I think it's beautiful. You've touched a bit on this already when you were talking about the meal that your mother used to make, but what does home taste, sound, feel, or smell like for you?
So home tastes like all those comfort food dishes, whether it's tair sadam or yogurt rice that my grandmother and my mom always make with bits of grapes in them. I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's amazing. Everyone should try it.
Ooh, I've definitely got to try that.
Home sounds like doors opening. Even in our home right now, when my husband turns the key and opens the door, I know, oh, he's home. There's another energy in the house. In my home in Delhi, we used to have a little metal bell outside. We had one of those electronic bells also, but my dad would only ring the metal bell, which has this tinny cowbell sound to it. That's what home sounds like. Home smells like jasmine and temper or tadka of mustard seeds, curry leaves, and red chili, which just makes you cough a little bit. It touches the back of your throat. Home feels warm.
Mm.
Home is just the right temperature, actually.
Not too hot.
Warm, not too hot. Home feels, like we've said before, a place where I can come alive and come to rest. Home is a place where I can be myself and yet be open enough to learning how to prepare myself to go on a new adventure, because it gives me that anchor.
Gives you the space to build the energy that you need to start those new relationships or build the new roots. I've mentioned to you before the phrase that I like to use, cultural complexity, because I feel that it encompasses a lot of people's experiences, which connects us all to those same feelings of belonging, unbelonging, and home, but still allows people to self-identify. So I'd like to ask you, how has your experience being culturally complex, having grown up in India, in New Delhi, with family from all over India, and then moving to Boston, living there for 2 years, and then moving to Oxford, how has that experience informed your relationships or other aspects of your life?
So I think being culturally complex almost opens you up to more of the world, because you just have more parts of your story to resonate with others' stories. And so not just growing up with family from different cultures and growing up in one and then figuring life out right now in another, but also engaging with culture is a big part of my work, because I think these things that make up our cultural identities, the languages we speak, the places we find home in, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, our reaction to things, people, nature, the stories we tell, and the myths that have shaped those stories, and a lot of the way we have, as humans, made sense of the world has been very similar. We've always wanted to communicate and form relationships and live in society. We have always wanted to look out for ourselves and those closest to us. All of us, no matter where we are right now, or what differences we might have, whatever conflicts we might think we have with each other, have the same needs from life and from the world. So being culturally complex just gives you more tools to deal with that, with a world that's constantly changing, and new perspectives to draw from.
I get this strong idea of sense making through much of what you do in your work, and working as a learning designer and facilitator and coach. You are helping others to make sense of all of that. And it's so true that we have so much commonality in how we make sense of the world. You talked about rituals and how most cultures will have a ritual of some kind. What's a ritual that you're building right now in Oxford?
Ritual is any routine or habit, but done with intention. It's something that you do, but you give deeper meaning to by giving it a beginning and an end. And I really love that idea of making an action that can seem very simple and everyday and infusing it with magic and meaning. So I started mapping moments in my day and my life here that give me that sense of home and belonging. And I realized that a lot of that was missing in the spaces close to, relationship with place and relationships with others. So I was interacting with loads of people online, but there was something about a physical interaction, of course, and a lot of us have felt that, right, with the pandemic and just life moving online. So I've been trying to look at what does a ritual for gathering friends and family online look like so that we can support each other better through these very, very trying times. But I've also been trying to look at rituals that can help me find my place in this new city that I find myself in. I've been trying to walk to different places, reach out to people for a coffee date every Tuesday. Because it gives me an excuse to shut my laptop and say, okay, no work for now. We're going to catch up and meet someone and find something new about them. My attempt to make friends in this new city as an adult has been an interesting experiment. Certain rituals like the celebration of certain festivals, like Diwali is one of my favorite festivals because of all the lights, and we would wear new clothes and made dishes very specific to Diwali Day, and it would be a time of being with family. And we can't have that anymore. So what does celebrating Diwali online look like? And that's what my family and I tried last year. So it would be another thing to figure out how old rituals that gave us comfort and something to hold on to at some point in time can be adapted to fit in with these new times.
And how does that feel for you you already celebrated the first one last year?
Yeah. I think what it's made me realize is that when we choose to do certain actions or do actions repeatedly, whether there is habits or part of a routine, I particularly do them because they become mechanical and they lose that meaning. And I think thinking about how can this task or action be a ritual or be part of a ritual has made me think more about the why. Why do we celebrate Diwali? Sitting halfway across the world and only being able to interact with each other online made me realize that Diwali is basically about spending time with your loved ones because you get a holiday and because you were eating together. And Diwali happened to be about a very specific smell of flowers and incense and of smoke because you would light the lanterns. But it looks a certain way because of the lights, but it was about family at the end of the day. So what we did online was just had a really long Zoom call, and my parents do a little puja at a specific time during Diwali. So they did that and we joined them online. They lit, a diya from our side, and then they took the phone outside at different points of the house where they would keep the lights, because it was all about how do you welcome Goddess Lakshmi into the house, and you're lighting the way for her to enter. And we did the same then in our house. We lit a candle and just put it outside. It was a really stormy day that day, so the candle went off almost immediately. But it was the act of doing it that gave it that meaning. Then I made the same halwa that I usually eat and just went and distributed it to some friends across Oxford. So it was just about finding that, like how to recreate that feeling.
Beautiful. Being separate forced you to think about what was the purpose of it, what was the meaning behind doing it in the first place. You've touched on this already in terms of your framework and your own learning question and also rituals and building rituals. What advice would you give to others who find themselves feeling unbelonging or like they don't fit in?
To talk about it, but also really try and understand that you're not alone in this. Because each and every one of us is going through our feelings of unbelonging, whether it's in terms of being in a new place, changing jobs and fields, being lost in the identity that you think you're building for yourself and not finding people who have the same mindsets as you. We all have those moments. One of the books that I was reading through the Learning Marathon was also Belonging by Toko-pa. And she says, we are always going through that feeling of unbelonging. And as long as we tell ourselves that there are spaces where we will always find meaning, whether for ourselves or in community with others, we just need to keep seeking them out. You're not alone in this. And when you recognize that, you just find it more comfortable to open up to others about it. And the more you share your story, the more you're able to find someone else's story that you will connect with. When we talk to others about it, we realize that it's not something I need to be doing alone. When you move to a new place, it feels like the onus is on us to adapt and figure out how to fit in. But belonging is not that. Belonging is not fitting in. Belonging is really about that acceptance and accepting others and creating that space where we can all just feel welcomed and welcome each other.
Thank you, Jahnvi, for your time, and also thank you for everything that I've learned from you during the Learning Marathon. And I'm so happy and grateful that we could start this podcast journey with you at the start. And I think it's only right that it's like that because you brought us all together during the lockdown. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Isabella. This has been a joy to see as it develops. You started with a question and here we are. And I'm just really excited to see all the branches of conversations that move out from here, from all the conversations you'll have. Really excited.
You've been listening to Zeno. To stay up to date with our monthly episodes, you can sign up to our newsletter at zenocast.org or follow us on Instagram at @Zeno_pod. Our theme music is composed by Alix Julian Edwards.